Familiar faces and people that I've had the pleasure of working with over the years as well. And exciting for me to have the opportunity to talk to you all about something that is very exciting for me and something that I'm very passionate about, which is how you can use behavioral science to actually make your organization more open-minded, more creative, and rid yourself of unconscious and sabotaging bias. So, thank you. How to make your organization more open-minded. This is a picture of Mike on the left, studying psychology in my second year at university as a psychology student. And that's a picture of Mike as the founder of the Behavioral Architects, working in a business, practicing behavioral science. The picture on the left, I actually think I might have been singing Careless Whisper by George Michael. And the picture on the right, I'm far more serious. But what happened in between was I actually spent about 25 years working in advertising with a number of people in this room. And I worked as a strategic planner, head of planning, and all sorts of other things as well. And people would often ask me, has your psychology degree been useful to you in advertising? And what should I study if I wanted to get into advertising? And I'd sort of say, well, not really. Like the psychology that I had studied seemed not really to be in use in most of advertising. And I think it wasn't until probably about 10 or 12 years ago that I started coming across behavioral science. And with my business partners, we had the idea to set up a business with behavioral science right at the start, right at the center. It didn't really occur to me that actually so much decision-making, I hate to say, in advertising during the time that I was working, and it seemed to be based on a lot of subjectivity rather than evidence. And I know that might be a contentious remark. It's probably less true of people working in media than other parts of the industry. However, what I saw in behavioral science, what really got me very excited about it, was that here was a body of scientific evidence that brought objectivity into decision-making. How could we think about what were the important factors in changing behavior? So that's why I'm excited to share with you the behavioral science of what makes organizations, all of us actually, biased, and actually can sometimes undermine our very best efforts. So this is an orchestra, and there's a story, which is a true story, about how the New York Symphony Orchestra used to recruit its members, and it used to have auditions, so you'd come along as a musician and you'd kind of do your audition. They go, yes, you're in, you're out. And they actually had a ratio of male to female orchestra members of about 90%. And then they changed to blind auditions, and the ratio of male to female changed to 50-50. And what's kind of interesting about that is it actually is an illustration of the effect of bias. And not only an illustration of the effect of bias, it also says that before they started doing blind auditions, the New York Symphony Orchestra was undermining itself. It was performing nowhere near at its best potential because of the bias involved in favoring male performers over female performers. You remove that bias, you end up with a better orchestra. And that kind of metaphor is something that I want to put in your minds as we kind of work through this morning, because it really is about, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, goodness me. Can I go back? Thank you, that one. That'll do. Thank you. So the point for me is, how do we actually perform better? How do we actually become more open-minded? How do we become more creative in the work that we do so that we can actually unlock the true potential in our own teams and actually in ourselves as well? Daniel Kahneman, sorry everyone, do I need to point this in a particular? Oh, okay, thank you. Daniel Kahneman, who is the Nobel Prize-winning author of a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, which I can see heads nodding, which is great. Many of you will be aware of, but he says about intuitive thinking that my intuitive thinking is just as prone to overconfidence, extreme predictions, and the planning fallacy as it was before I made a study of these issues. What he's saying is that although he's perhaps the world's most famous behavioral science, he is still prone to bias in the work that he does. Thank you. So what I want to talk about is cognitive biases at work in organizations. I want to help you spot what might be going on unconsciously that will be happening at the moment, and everything that anyone is working on, you will find that you are influenced by some of these biases. And I include myself in that. I'm no more immune than Daniel Kahneman is to these cognitive biases. But what I'd like to do, just to sort of give you a kind of an opportunity to apply these as I talk, is just take a moment to write down something that you're working on at the moment that's a bit of a goal. It might be a project goal, it might be a new behavior that you're trying to create, or it might be something that you and your team are aiming towards. So just write down a summarizing sentence for what that is, or a picture. It can be anything you like. And what I'd encourage you to do, we'll come back to this at the end, is just note down any ideas that occur to you to solve that challenge based on what I talk about in the next 25 minutes, or 20 minutes probably by now. All right. So I'm going to talk about a number of different cognitive biases that undermine our behavior. And I think many of you will recognize these things. And the very first of these biases that will happen when we're all working in teams is something called groupthink and happy talk. It's where it's just easy to agree. And it was weird last week when we did this in Melbourne. I'd spoken about this. We had the speaker panel up on the stage, and there was a question, and Wayne Filbert asked it one way, and I was like, I agree with Wayne. And that's an example of happy talk and groupthink already kind of happening just after I'd been speaking about it. But this is based largely on the principle of social norms. And as you can see here, look at these lemmings. They're saying, one of them saying, I don't know where we're going, but from the look of this crowd, it's got to be good. And off they go. And it's because it feels good to be doing the same thing as everyone else. It feels good when we are in a project meeting or a team meeting to have agreement. You know, that feeling of cohesion can be really, really powerful and really motivating, but sometimes we can all be heading in the wrong direction together, and it can actually lead us to undermine our own performance. So essentially what's going on is we do look to other people to guide us when we're uncertain, and we conform to peer pressure. And one of the studies, the scientific studies, the evidence, remember I mentioned that at the start of what I love about behavioral science, there is evidence for everything. This study here is one where people are asked in a group, see that line on the left there, which of the lines on the right corresponds to be the same in length. And what happens in the study is that there's a group of 5 or 6 people, and most of the people in the study are stooges. They've been placed by the experimenter deliberately to give the wrong answer. So you see this, you know, you can Google this on, you can see this on YouTube, and you can see people kind of going, oh, B, B, B. And one by one, they all say B. They should be saying C. And the one experimental subject who's the genuine person, you can see their reaction. It's like the first time they hear B, they kind of go, huh? And then it's, huh? And then it comes to their turn, and they go B. And what happens with this? So 75% of participants in this study conformed to that majority opinion, even though they knew it to be wrong, even though it was against the evidence of their own senses. And, you know, the kinds of things that they said, they must be right, there's 5 of them, 1 of me, I know they're wrong, but why should I make waves? Groupthink and happy talk. The next one I want to talk about is availability bias. And this is an interesting, they're all interesting things, these biases, but availability bias is our tendency to think something more likely, the easier it comes to mind. So it's a subconscious or an unconscious heuristic, as we say, that helps us make a judgment about the probability of something. And so, if I were to ask you, greater risk of dying, is it a terrorist attack or a bee sting, a wasp sting? Most people are going to say terrorist attack, because it's sort of vivid. You think of the explosion, all of this sort of stuff. But wasp stings, relatively innocuous, but as you guessed, it's going to be wasp stings. A similar question about which animals in the US are responsible for the greatest number of deaths. And the first time you look at this list, it's kind of easy to imagine bear attacks and alligators and so on, but it's deer that are the biggest cause of deaths in the US, probably running out in front of cars. So what Daniel Kahneman and his collaborator Amos Tversky said is that we often decide that an outcome is extremely unlikely or impossible because we're unable to imagine any chain of events that could cause it to occur. The defect often is in the imagination. So think about this when you're in groups, when you're working. Often things that come more easily to mind can be thought of as gut instinct, right? Things that come easily to mind can be thought more likely when they're not actually. So it's a real risk for our decision making and the way we think about things. Another one is confirmation bias, and it's the idea that really we seek out information that agrees with what we already think. Most of us don't look to find information that contradicts what we think or actually gives us an opposite view. It's good to see the data that supports our view. So some of the, one of the ways to kind of think about this is that it's either a biased assimilation of evidence or highly motivated reasoning that, we're making an argument for something that makes us right, not necessarily seeing what's right in the data. So there's a distinction there between objective facts and what confirms our beliefs, and then that bit in the middle, what we actually see and pay attention to. And again, you think about this in the context of evaluating information as you're making a decision about something. Confirmation bias is a risk, because if we're not seeing what doesn't support what we think, we might be missing out on really valuable information. So, did you read my paper on confirmation bias? Yes, but it only proved what I already knew. So the reasoning process is more like a lawyer defending a client than a judge or a scientist seeking the truth, and we're all at risk of this. So here's just probably another amusing cartoon, but let's begin the meeting, but be aware that I'm documenting all of your bullying behavior. I'm not even close to being a bully, but now your confirmation bias will make everything I say sound like bullying to you. Can you repeat the part after you implied that I'm a delusional witch? Anchoring. So anchoring is how very often we overweight information that's immediately available to us in the decision-making context. And a particular piece of information might just assume a greater significance in the way that we're thinking about a project. And again, think about the things that you wrote down on your piece of paper at the start. But this is it. Sometimes we anchor so much on one thing that we don't see other things. And I love this example here. So a group of people are asked to estimate the results of these sums here. So 1 times 2 times 3 times 4, and then 8 times 7 times 6 times 5. It's the same information. It's the same number, but the answers that people give are different depending on what numbers they saw first. We anchor very often to what we see first. The first information that we become aware of becomes really dominant in how we actually think about and make evaluations subsequently. So on that bottom right piece, you see there that people who start with the number 1, they estimate lower than people who start with the number 8. They're both wrong. Not many people are really good at mental arithmetic, but the point is what we anchor to first influences our decision. And if I were to show you 2 candidates for a job interview, you've got John here on the left and Mark on the right, and I told you that John is intelligent and industrious, and Mark is jealous and stubborn. And then I also say, but with John, he's impulsive, critical, stubborn and jealous, or with Mark, then I say impulsive, industrious, and he's intelligent as well. It's the same information in a different order, but I bet you're hiring John. given the first things that you heard about him. You can see this in the way choice is presented as well. There's something in anchoring where we anchor to the extremes. So in making a donation to Oxfam, we look at this information and we go, £100, Jesus, that's a lot of money to give. But I don't want to be a cheapskate and only give £25. I'll give 50. And this is an example of nudging. It's called choice architecture, where you have been nudged into the choice in the middle. So we always say to people, when you're kind of presenting pricing proposals, where do you put the price that you want to sell, or the cost that you want to sell? It'll be the one in the middle, because people like looking at wine lists in restaurants. You look at the top, you look at the bottom, you go for something in the middle. Anchoring. So think about how that might be at work when you're at work. So I'll start our negotiation by setting the anchor price at $5. I was going to say $27,500, but you beat me to the anchor, and now I can't help thinking the fair price is closer to $5. How does an engineer know more about the intricacies of my job than I do? I had 5 minutes on a browser. So what Daniel Kahneman says basically is, don't start with numbers in negotiation. Leave it to the end, because you put numbers in people's mind, and that becomes an anchor for everything that happens subsequently. Optimism bias. This is about how we overestimate the likelihood of experiencing good events compared to negative ones, right? So one of the studies around this I want to talk about is this one here, where people are asked, what do you think is the likelihood of you personally experiencing a particular medical disease? And they say 10%. And then the researchers come back to that same group of people and they say, actually, the real medical data of someone in your age group contracting this disease is 30%. Now go away and recalculate. Tell us again what you think the likelihood is for you personally of getting this disease. Do they move to 30%? Not at all. They move from 10% to 11%. Like it's the same, basically. So people are going, okay, I get that other people are going to be more likely to experience this disease or contract this disease, but it won't happen to me because I'm optimistic. So related to optimism bias, and it's important to bear this, just to bring it back to things that you might be working on, the chances are that all of us are going to be excessively optimistic about the outcome of our plans. And that might blind us to other possibilities. Similarly with overconfidence bias, which is the idea that we all think that we're better than average. 70% of people think they're better than average drivers, which is just statistically impossible. Not everyone can be better than average, but we all think it. So essentially the kind of point here, it's when our subjective confidence in our own ability is greater than the objective evidence for that. So think about that in teams, think about it in decision making. You are likely to be overconfident about the rightness of your own decision. Confidence mainly tells you an individual has constructed a coherent story in his mind, not necessarily that the story is true. It's called the John Wayne effect. We, in our society, seem to value people who are decisive and, we're going off in this direction. And so we kind of adopt these kind of, these visions and these values around leadership that are all about kind of looking like you know where you're going and communicating overconfidence. But what Daniel Kahneman has to say about this again, whoops, sorry, I didn't get that. Sorry, I'm clicking on the wrong way. Thank you. Thank you very much. He says this is the most significant of all cognitive biases and perhaps the most dangerous, and is really involved in things like whether it's the sinking of the Titanic, Chernobyl, the response to the COVID-19 pandemic, overconfidence, people trusting too much in their own skills and ability, what they think their own skills and ability are. So I've kind of given you a journey through the snake pits, the things that might actually be at play for all of us. And I am not excusing myself from this in any way at all. But these are the things that are going on. And part of the key to overcoming them is just to be conscious in the first instance. Just to know that these sorts of things are going to be in operation. But the next bit that I want to do is to give you some tools and some things that you can use to actually dial down these biases that are going to be in operation. So, 5 simple strategies for you if you are working on your own. So you might be, I'm in a room here with media. You might be working on your media plan. You might be doing it singly at the moment. So these are some of the strategies that you might use to actually de-bias your own decision making. So when you write something, you make a plan. Okay, you think that's right. Consider the opposite. So that could be, what if the timeline needs to be doubled? What if the costs are doubled? What if the costs are half? What if things change? How does my plan stack up if I think about it another way? So what you're doing here is you're not going with your first thought, right? You are considering what the opposite might be of what you're thinking. Forecast twice. It's a similar sort of principle, but again, when we are in a hurry to do things, I think everyone's probably in a hurry at the moment. No one's not busy, or no one has very little to do. We're all trying to get multiple things done. If you are rushing to get something done, you should take that as a sign, or a trigger, if you like, to actually think, you know what, before I send this, I'm going to think about it again. Forecast twice. Or take an outsider's view. If you've been working on something, again, speak to a colleague, someone at the desk. I'm thinking this at the moment. What's your view if you haven't been working on it? What's a more objective view than an outsider who's unlikely to have the same endowment? What would an outsider say about your ideas and your thoughts? So, and the other way to think about this as well is that rather than sort of giving a range of options, make very precise predictions or estimates. So a low, a medium, and a high, which encourages you to think more directly about the specifics of something rather than the generalities of a range, which tends to be quite vague. So build mechanisms for feedback as well. So that, again, that might be talk to your neighbor, but find a way to get another person's feedback on the work that you've done to actually start to remove the bias that is likely to be built in. So 5 simple, is that making sense so far? I can see a few people kind of making notes, which is great. I hope you're getting some ideas for individual working. Talking about group working now, and that's a different set of tools that you can use, but no less powerful. So I like this quote here, popped it up for you to consider. Members of any small cohesive group tend to maintain esprit de corps by unconsciously developing a number of shared illusions and related norms that interfere with critical thinking and reality testing. So being cohesive can be more attractive sometimes than actually getting to the right place. So strategy 1, build a critical thinking culture. So Jeff Bezos says, leaders come forward with problems or information, even when doing so is awkward or embarrassing. Respectfully challenge decisions when they disagree, even when doing so is uncomfortable and exhausting. They do not compromise for the sake of social cohesion. That's a value at Amazon. But that idea that you create permission for people to disagree, to come forward with a different, contrary point of view, ideally based on evidence, that is actually welcomed because you frame it as this is going to make the thinking better, uncomfortable though it may be. Sorry, would you mind clicking on? Thank you. So President Roosevelt, I think the second one maybe during the Second World War, used to have a technique where he would gather viewpoints privately. When he was considering a big decision, he would talk to each of his advisors separately. Apparently, he would give each one the impression that he was agreeing with them. just kind of nodding as they're talking to kind of, to get more of their view, but he'd speak to people separately before he then formed his own view. So think about that, when you're in groups, rather than sort of asking what everyone thinks around the table. Maybe there are opportunities to speak to people individually. It might take longer, but the chances are you get to a better place. Make a pre-mortem. What happens if this goes horribly wrong, people? What are the risks to this strategy? And we kind of find this quite a lot, and I'm sure people in the room kind of work on government assignments as well. A lot of our work is in sort of social marketing and community engagement and so on. And we find that a lot of the government clients in particular really value in the proposals us thinking about the risks and how we mitigate for those from different parts of our methodology. What could go wrong and how do you think about solving it? So making a pre-mortem can be a very powerful thing to do. Appoint a red team. So this is a military kind of idea, the notion that you actually, and this depends, I guess, on the size of your organization, but if you could put together another team who operates as a red team to oppose you, to be the opponent, to actually, their brief is to pull apart your thinking so that you make it more robust, you create greater chances, that your strategy is going to succeed. So it's about appointing a red team. Sorry, would you mind clicking this on again? Might need a new battery, I think, for Narissa when it's your turn. And then, finally here, choose from a complete set of alternatives. And what this means is don't stop at one. Once you've got your first idea, force yourself to come up with another idea. And if you can, another one. So you create alternatives that as a team you can write up on a whiteboard or wherever, Miro board, wherever it is, and you can look at objectively, you can literally share the same perspective onto those alternatives and have a reasonable discussion about which is the best one to pursue. Thank you. So I'm just going to summarize. I'm conscious I'm probably at time at this point. So I just want to summarize here to say that there are 5 strategies that you can use when working individually, and there are 5 strategies when you're working in groups. And if you can more consciously apply these strategies against your particular plans, your particular ideas, your objectives in your working team, then you stand a greater chance of reducing the biases that are going to be going on. Whether you know about them or not, they will be there, and the chances are that they can sabotage your best performance. So make sure that you use these strategies to actually become more open-minded and unlock the potential in yourselves and also in your team. Next one, please. So I just want to ask you this, and there won't be time to discuss this right now, but can I get a show of hands? Did anyone get a new idea on stuff they were working on? Oh, that's great. I was really worried for a moment there that there'd just be this sort of no hands going up in the air. That was completely useless, Mike. So I'm pleased about that. I'm just going to leave here by giving you something to smile at. Thank you. Next slide. There we go. So thank you very much, everyone. I'm going to be here for a while. Looking forward to conversations later on as we go through. Thank you.